Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you, of course, by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Glad to be with you on Friday, the 22nd day of June, 2018. I've got a pretty cool announcement. Tomorrow will be part of the return of the Carlucci Show. So if you want to check out Greg Carlucci and myself, we'll be on sometime tomorrow afternoon. Excited to get that show rolling again. I think you're going to see more of a press the issues kind of side of me. I spend most of the show talking about baseball, sports, and unifying America. But, in there, I'm going to get, probably a little more deeper into stuff, probably a little more passionate about things. I think there may be the occasional curse word, which, I try not to do here on this show, but I do it more in passion than anything else. And I think, anybody that likes to speak with just constant F-bombs and curse words as part of the sentences that they make, I don't think are necessarily using the English language to the best of its ability. But a couple things we're going to hit up today. We're going to talk about the NBA draft. We're going to talk about quarterbacks in the NFL. The guy that's starting. You can talk about, let's say, a Tom Brady. You could go back in time to a Brett Favre or a Joe Montana. And reasons why every single one of these quarterbacks are going to be pissed off if there's somebody else on their roster. They may be playing second fiddle, the other guy that's on the roster. But anybody that has the talent and the ability to start in the NFL, you would understand why a starting quarterback would be pissed off if that guy was on the same roster as them. I want to talk about something that is pretty cool with the Nationals and the Mariners, if somehow they made it to the World Series. And we're going to do our Nobody's Listening segment towards the end of the program, and we're going to talk about deadbeat dads. But, of course, last night was the NBA draft, and pretty cool the way it ended up working out. I think if you're going back and you want to recap, what happened as far as what teams ended up doing what, I don't think anybody was really shocked that DeAndre Ayton went number 1 overall to the Phoenix Suns. A lot of players that were taken were pretty much within the same confines of where they were expected to be taken. Now, the one thing that I do want to talk about, because you look at it, there was a series of trades, and the first one that kind of stood out was a trade between the Hawks and the Mavericks. It was pretty obvious that the Dallas Mavericks wanted, Doncic, the guy from Slovenia, and he wasn't going to be available when they picked that number 5. So, you look back at that and you say, hey, that was a pretty good trade for the Dallas Mavericks because they got the player that they wanted. The Hawks were okay getting, let's say, a future first-round pick, to slide down a couple spots and end up taking a player that, they think is going to be pretty good. And I think Trae Young was a guy that people were talking about him kind of dropping in the draft, going maybe 8 or 9 to the Cavaliers or the Knicks, or potentially even later than that. And I had said a couple weeks ago, Trae Young was such a talent that I think it would be too much of a risk for a lot of teams to pass up on when you're getting 5th, 6th, 7th. And, in the draft, you let a player with that much upside and that much, potential ability to be a team leader, a leading scorer, a top player on a particular team. The chances of end up losing or looking bad, years upon years or down the road, just continues to increase when you pass on a player with that kind of talent. So I thought Trae Young was going to go close to top 5. And if he wasn't going top 5, he was going to go 6. I didn't think he was going to be around when the Cavaliers selected at 8 when they ended up taking Colin Sexton, or the Knicks, who ended up taking, Knox from Kentucky with the 9th overall pick. I look at it, from the Knicks, and obviously, this is a New York-centric show. A lot of our listeners are from the New York area, so a lot of the quick reaction is coming from the fans of the New York Knicks. And, you want to try to figure out, did they make as big of a mistake as potential, people look back on and say? people say, hey, it's a bad draft for the Knicks. But, really what happens, pretty much as you go, year upon year, it seems to be the same old story with the Knicks. And I don't know if this guy is going to end up being an impact player for the Knicks. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know for a fact that this is the exact right fit, but one thing I know that the New York Knicks needed to do was get themselves a better player and an impact player. And the New York Knicks are not going to be close to making an impact in the playoffs. In other words, having a deep run in the postseason in the NBA probably for another couple years. So the best move that the Knicks could make is get the best overall player that fits what they're trying to do. And the question is, and we could ask, they have a new coach. They have a general manager that's only been there for a little over a year. So is it a guarantee that anybody they would have taken with the 9th overall pick was going to be the right fit? The issue that the Knicks have to focus on is how they're going to build their team around Kristaps Porzingis. And Kevin Knox, a freshman from Kentucky, according to CBS.com, says a fine prospect. The move was right there begging for the Knicks to take it. Michael Porter, of course. A lot of people were ticked off. Knicks fans were starting to get excited thinking that Michael Porter was going to be the guy or the ideal player to take with the 9th overall pick. And the issue is, all right, who's going to be better now? And it's not necessarily fair to Kevin Knox, but Kevin Knox has additional pressure on him to perform. He could shoot, he could score, he could be a good supporting player for Porzingis, who, by the way, is not playing next year. He's probably going to be out for the year. So, he's going to get a chance to develop. There's a lot to question if you're a Knicks fan, or if you're analyzing the New York Knicks and their position after they had their 9th overall pick. And unfortunately, a lot's going to be taken, it's going to be taken out on Kevin Knox. And I'm not necessarily sure that Kevin Knox is a bad player. The popular pick would have been Michael Porter Jr., but the problem with Michael Porter, of course, was the back injury. He had surgery last year. When he came into college, he was considered to be the best freshman in the preseason. Expected to be a star, expected to be a potential top 3 or top 4 pick out of the University of Missouri. What ends up happening, obviously, the back surgery, he ends up missing almost the entire year. But there was no doubt he was going to be a one and done. There was no doubt that he was going to play Missouri for 1 year and get into the NBA draft. It was almost official before the season even started, before he played in his first college game. Now, if you want to talk about a couple of the players that have the most upside, Michael Porter going number 14 to the Denver Nuggets probably has that. How much is he going to play his first season? How well is his back? Sometimes people have back surgery and they get back on with their life and they end up being okay. Sometimes people have back surgery and they end up being in a position where it becomes a chronic thing. I mean, look at Greg Oden. Look at many of the players in the NBA that have had problems with their backs over a series of years. It's no joke. Back injury could potentially be serious. So because of that, I understand why a lot of players passed on Michael Porter. And when I started out the show, I was talking about Trae Young. Trae Young looks like, he could be a good player. He could potentially be a great player. But you wonder if he doesn't perform to the standards of what's expected. Is he going to be a problem, per se, as we hit the halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show? So there could have been a potential that Trae Young could have dropped, but I would not have understood it as much as I understood Michael Porter falling as far as he did. Now, the fact that the Clippers had back-to-back picks at 12 and 13 surprised me that they wouldn't take a shot on Michael Porter. I thought they took a very good player, shooting guard Jerome Robertson from Boston College. I think this guy is going to be a very good player. And, of course, you had the flip that they did with Charlotte with the 11th and 12th picks. Them ended up getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from Kentucky and Miles Bridges going to Charlotte. But I thought the Clippers would have been in a great spot. Hey, you know what? You make a solid pick. Let's say you take a Robinson. And I don't have an issue with Alexander or Bridges. I think, they're both very good players. I think they're going to be good pros. But let's say you take, a Robinson, and then you take a chance on a Porter. And all of a sudden, you look at that as your potential backcourt for the future. Or, Robinson maybe being a two-guard and Porter maybe being a small forward. And you look at those two players as part of your core. I would have liked that chance if I was the Clippers a little more than what they ended up doing. Now, the Nuggets said, hey, I didn't think Michael Porter is going to be available. I'm going to take him. And the question is, you look at a Denver team, and it's tough being in a Western Conference. It really is. I feel bad for a lot of these teams. The Phoenix Suns have the number 1 overall pick. They have the best chance to improve themselves. But you look at a team like Denver, you look at a team like the Clippers, you look at some other teams in those Western Conference, and you're like, even Dallas. And I know Dallas got the player that they wanted. They got Doncic, from Slovenia. That was the guy that they wanted to. They ended up having to give a first-round pickup to do it. But that was the player that they wanted. You play him alongside Nowitzki, in the last couple of years of his career. He maybe becomes the heir apparent. Maybe, Doncic down the road leads the Dallas Mavericks to an NBA championship. He could become that type of player. But if you're on the second half of the Western Conference in the National Basketball Association, you really have to strike gold if you're going to be up on the same level as a Golden State or on the same level as a Houston. San Antonio continues to retool itself. The player that they ended up taking with their first-round pick could potentially have an even bigger upside than Michael Porter, and that's Lonnie Walker from Miami. And honestly, when he was taken with the 18th overall pick by the Spurs, I was a little surprised. I thought this would be a guy that could have been taken somewhere in the early teens. You mentioned the Clippers. If the Clippers took, Lonnie Walker and Michael Porter, you're talking about probably two players that got taken, in the mid part of the first round of the draft that had the best potential to become, let's say the Donovan Mitchell of this coming season. But I thought that was a great pick by the Spurs. And obviously they got their own turmoil and issues that they're going with Kawhi Leonard. And should they get involved in the LeBron James thing? And, I got to be honest, I'm so tired of talking about LeBron James because he's basically just going to drag this whole thing out as long as he can. And you're going to have so many different stories about, this team or that team. But, with the Spurs, they do have to focus on what they're going to do with Kawhi Leonard. Are they going to keep him? Is there enough in that relationship between Leonard and the coach and the general manager there that, there could be something salvaged there? Because obviously him being a star player on that team makes the Spurs a perennial contender. And if he's not going to be there, if he's going to be traded, what do you get back in return? Is it a draft pick situation? Do you get a legit player in return? What does that mean for Lonnie Walker? Lonnie Walker and Kawhi Leonard could certainly provide a pretty good 1-2 combo in a San Antonio Spurs team that, listen, I think is far away from being, NBA championship caliber. But I think they could win a couple games against Golden State. They can knock Houston around a little bit, maybe upset them if everything ends up working right. You look at the trades that happened in the NBA. And the first one I was okay with. I had no issue with, Dallas getting exactly what they wanted. The Mavericks wanted, the center from Slovenia. He wasn't going to be available for them at pick number 5. So they flipped with the Hawks. They end up having to give up a future first-round pick. But that's the price that you got to pay for getting the player that you want. So I respect the Dallas Mavericks going out there, getting the player that they wanted. I got a little bit of an issue with the trade that I just mentioned between the Hornets and the Clippers. Hornets got the 11th pick. They select, Gagojis Alexander from Kentucky. The Clippers take Miles Bridges from Michigan State. Now, the only scenario that I can make any sense of this, or the only scenario that I could say it's okay if this is the way that it happened, if the Clippers were dead set on taking Alexander with the 12th overall pick, and we're looking at Charlotte and saying, man, I hope they don't take our guy. Listen, we've all been in that situation in fantasy sports, right? You know, in fantasy baseball or fantasy football, we're eyeing a player as our pick is coming, and right before we're about to pick, somebody takes our guy. And, you know, sometimes we have a backup player or a backup plan, but other times we got to say, hey, listen, I might need the full 2 minutes here to figure out who I'm going to take because I really wanted to take the player that was taken before me. If that was the case with the Clippers and the Hornets basically took the player right before their eyes that they wanted to take at number 12, then I understand the trade. You know, Miles Bridges, I think helps the Clippers, or could have helped the Clippers a little more than the Charlotte Hornets. And I'm just not so sure that it's the most sensible trade in the world. You know, the Suns and the 76ers end up making a trade. The Suns, who of course had the number 1 overall pick, end up getting the number 16 overall pick. Flip in with the 76ers, who benefited from, you know, listen, a team that had a very good season, but also getting a top 10 pick. And this probably was one of the more controversial trades because Mikal Bridges, coming out of Villanova, obviously right in the suburbs of Philadelphia. You know, the hometown guy, spent a couple of years at Villanova, won a national championship. Now has a chance to play in the NBA for Philadelphia. I'm sure it would have been great for him. I'm sure it would have been great for a lot of the fans of the 76ers. So the Suns, who take the 16 pick, end up getting the number 1 and the number 10 players overall in the NBA draft. And I think Bridges will benefit from playing in Phoenix, a team that struggled last year, but also has Booker. You know, you got, you know, DeAndre Ayton with the number 1 overall pick. So it's a team that I think is trending in the right direction. And if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you're saying, hey, I'm getting an extra first rounder out of it. And the player that you end up getting is Zaire Smith, who probably is comparable enough to what they're looking to build with. He may not be a guy that's looking to get 35, 40 minutes a game. He may be able to play a better role on the 76er team, and that could have been the reason. You know, he's an NBA-ready player. You know, which, I'm sorry, Bridges was more of the NBA-ready player. I think they have a guy in Zaire Smith who I think can grow into a better player and potentially has a bigger upside. But he's a little more raw. And the 76ers may believe, and regardless of how their offseason ends up turning out, you know, we could mention any team name and say, hey, how would they look with LeBron James? But the NBA, you know, you look at the 76ers, and I think, you know, they're in a very good position to compete right now. And they look at a guy like Smith and say, hey, this may be a guy that's going to sit on our bench and maybe not get a ton of minutes the first year. And if we can develop him, you know, pretty similar to guys like Embiid and Simmons, you know, maybe down the road he becomes a very more important piece to us. As opposed to Bridges, who, with all due respect to his ties to Philadelphia and Villanova and the whole thing, he may be asking for minutes that may not necessarily be available with the 76ers. And obviously a handful of other trades were made, mostly for second-round picks. You know, and you look at the couple teams, whether it's Charlotte, whether it's the Clippers, teams that are looking to benefit themselves down the road, saying, hey, we could get ourselves a couple second-round picks down the road. I don't necessarily love that from a trade standpoint, because think about it. If we go back to the NBA and we follow, you know, top players and stars, How many second-round draft picks, or how many players that weren't drafted at all, became legitimate stars in the NBA? In fact, you can make a case that there is probably as many players that weren't drafted at all that became stars in the NBA than players that were drafted in the second round. So I understand from a salary cap standpoint, you may be close to being maxed out, and you say, hey, maybe next year we're going to be in a tougher position. It's going to be harder to get money off the cap. Maybe we could add a couple second rounders. We have 2-3 second round picks next year. We could add a couple more bodies in there. But the examples of second round draft picks in the NBA becoming legitimate stars and top players in the NBA, there aren't too many of them. So I think when you're moving down in a draft, and it all depends on the player, of course. If you end up, trading away a potential to get a top 10 overall player in a draft, and you end up going into the 20-somethings, but you get a couple second-round picks after it, I don't know if it's necessarily a good decision. But if you move, let's say, I don't know, in the first round from 19 to 23 or something like that, and the player you feel like you're getting at 23 is about the same that you're getting at 19, and you get a couple more picks, at least they're picks in a lottery, right? And I know we use the word lottery as it applies to the NBA a lot. But the thing that I look at is every pick that you have, whether it's in the top 5 or it's in the top 10, they're all pretty much chances at a lottery. Maybe there's somebody that's a little bit underrated. Maybe there's somebody that's a little raw that has a little bit of upside. And you know what? You work them in your own system and you see how it works out. But we don't see too many second-round picks in the NBA becoming stars. We find some players that become useful. Some players could potentially become starters. Some players are pretty good role players. Outside of that, you're not getting the next legitimate star in the second round of the draft. So teams that were going crazy, piling up future second-round picks, I don't necessarily know what it is that you're trying to do. Like I said, the only exception is if you're moving down a couple spots and you feel like the player you're getting a couple spots later is as good as the player that you were going to take before. If it's an even thing and you're just getting picks for the sake of getting picks, that's fine. But if you're making a trade feeling like you're really upgrading your team by getting these second-round picks, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. This is John Pielli, the Pass Ball Show, brought to you, of course, by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. You look at the NFL, and one of the more popular topics that I've spoken about on this show, has to do with star quarterbacks. And you can make the statement a little more broad when you're talking about star players as they apply not necessarily to football but to all sports. You have a guy that is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, is a legend and an icon in a particular city or for a particular team. You want to make sure that that person is kind of welcomed all the way through their last days. You want to know that they're going to get the proper send-off. You want to know that they're always going to be in the heart of the fans and mean as much to the organization as it seems to be for the impact that they've had and the amount of years that they've played, and in a lot of cases, the championships that they won. So you look at an NFL quarterback, and it's probably the toughest position to be a star at, number one. Look at how many very good quarterbacks in the NFL never take that step and become stars. We're starting to make decisions, or have to make decisions within the next couple of years, on a guy like Jameis Winston, on a guy like Marcus Mariota. I mean, they're still going at it. They're still, improving their teams potentially. But you're going to make a call at a certain point and wonder, are either of these quarterbacks franchise caliber starting quarterbacks that are going to be stars in this league? So when you get one, when you're lucky enough to have one that's going to represent a generation, how about the New York Giants and Eli Manning wins them 2 Super Bowls? You look, obviously, you could go back in time, but Ben Roethlisberger, same draft as Manning with the Steelers, couple Super Bowls. Tom Brady, of course, and you go back in time, and there's Brett Favre, and before that, you're talking about Joe Montana. The one thing that a lot of these guys have in common is they feel like they've earned enough being the stars that they are, and future Hall of Famers that they are, the NFL quarterback icons that they are, that they don't deserve to have anybody looking, looking up at them or have to look over their shoulder at the next quarterback that's going to take over for them. You saw what happened in New England with the trade of Jimmy Garoppolo to the San Francisco 49ers. And the Patriots may over time regret that trade. Pretty similar to a trade that was made, years ago. You think of a guy in Joe Montana, who still by many is considered the best quarterback to ever play in the National Football League. The 49ers had made a trade with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get Steve Young. And Steve Young sitting there as a backup irritated Joe Montana. All Joe Montana kept hearing about is this is the guy that's going to take over for you. Are you grooming him? And his answer probably was similar to what Brett Favre's answer was 13 years ago when he was asked about Aaron Rodgers. There's nothing in my contract, and Brett Favre said this, that, says that I have to get the next guy ready. My contract doesn't say I have to get Aaron Rodgers ready to play. Now, hopefully he watches me and gets something from that. And it makes sense. Because a quarterback in the National Football League is their livelihood. A quarterback in the National Football League, at some point is going to switch over. Brett Favre knew in his heart of hearts, no matter what, that he wasn't going to play forever. Pretty similar to Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. He knows, and he's becoming more honest to it right now. If you hear some of his discussion in interviews, at some point, he's not going to be playing. He's not going to be the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots anymore. Somebody else is going to have to play there. But Tom Brady believes the same thing as Brett Favre, who believes the same thing as Eli Manning, who believes the same thing as Joe Montana. And at some point, he's going to believe the same thing as Aaron Rodgers. Whoever the quarterback is when I'm not here anymore should not be my problem. And you wonder, and I think people in the media have made more of a big deal about, oh my God, I can't believe that Joe Montana and Steve Young didn't get along. I can't believe that Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers don't like each other or didn't like each other. I wouldn't be able to believe it if Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo didn't like each other. Problem is, each one of these star quarterbacks look at the position and their job as their livelihood. And anybody that's out there doing whatever it is that you do for a living, you want to sit here and groom the next person to take your job? I mean, it's easy if you're moving on to do something else. It's easy if you're being promoted. It's easy if you're going into a better position. Yeah, sure, you'd be more inclined to want to work the next player into, or the next person into the job that you are holding. It's the way corporations work, but it isn't the way sports work. When a professional athlete retires or a professional athlete moves on, they have no obligation to make sure that that position that they had is held warm or kept in good hands. So Brett Favre, and sure, he can sound like a jerk sometimes. I don't have any issue with saying that. But the problem that I have with all this is how we make it like it's supposed to be such a smooth transition. And Aaron Rodgers at age 35 understands things a little bit better than he did before. Once again, this is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. I look at baseball and I see a potential of something that I thought a couple years ago would have been a big deal. There are two teams in Major League Baseball that have not made it to the World Series. And those are the Washington Nationals and the Seattle Mariners. And there were two teams for a little while going almost in opposite directions. The potential of the Washington Nationals has never been higher. Starting in 2012 with Bryce Harper and the decision that Mike Rizzo made to cut Steven Strasburg to the amount of innings that he had and have him miss the postseason. They won the division again in 2014 and 2016 and 2017. So right now they've had 4 postseason appearances in the last 6 years. Very good chance they're getting to the playoffs again this year, though they have a little more of a challenge. The Braves are much better. The Philadelphia Phillies are much better. So I'm thinking it's inevitable in a certain amount of time. You'd see it, right? Will or could the Nationals finally get to the World Series? Remember, going back to 1969 when it came in as the Montreal Expos, they have never made it to a World Series. Prior to their 2012 playoff appearance when they won the National League Eastern Division, the only other time they'd been in the postseason was when they won that split season of 1981 with the strike, ended up beating the Phillies in the division round, lost a tough Game 5 to the Los Angeles Dodgers on the Rick Monday home run off of Steve Rodgers. So this is a team that's been around for a while, hasn't necessarily been terrible. I mean, the Montreal Expos of the late 70s and early 80s were very good. Think about the Montreal Expos of 1994, who may have very well had the best team in all of Major League Baseball. Their season was cut short because of the strike. And obviously the Nationals that you look at right now. So I don't think anybody's going to debate whether the Nationals have a chance to get to the World Series. I think we look at them and say, hey, are they finally going to get over the hump? I mean, 4 times getting to the divisional round, you can't get past it and get to the League Championship Series. That's a big deal. So once you get to 4 and you start counting, you're like, all right, is this team ever going to get over the hump? We're going to find out, because I bet you the Washington Nationals after 2018 are going to look a lot different next year. I'd be surprised if they re-sign Bryce Harper, and because of that, there's going to be a major change in the construction of that roster. So I look at the other team that has never been to a World Series in their history. This is a team that came into Major League Baseball in 1977. And the only playoff appearances that they've ever had in the history of their franchise were when Lou Piniella was their manager. Think about how that stands out. You have one manager, and I would assume that it's the only team in Major League Baseball history. And I'm going to tell you quickly, probably the Tampa Bay Rays, I would say, are also in this category. And this, once again, is off the top of my head, so if there's another team that you could think of that fills this bill, please throw it up in a comment feed, whether it's on Facebook Live or Periscope. But the Mariners, even without Robinson Cano, sitting there 17 games over 500, they didn't look so good against the Yankees. They seemed to find ways to lose that game, and pretty much had, like you would expect a team like Seattle if they were playing the Yankees in a best-of-5 series or a best-of-7 series. You figured they'd hang in there, maybe win a game here and there, but find just enough within itself to lose the games that mean the most. So I'm not looking at the Mariners and saying, hey, this is the year they're getting to the World Series. They got a lot of teams to climb over. You start with the Astros in their own division. The Astros are on a big winning streak, doing a tremendous job. Defending World Series champions. But you also have the Yankees. You also have the Red Sox. I would have to say you have to throw the Indians in there. So you're looking at least 4 teams that the Seattle Mariners have to find a way to get through, climb over, and get to the World Series. Now play the law of odds and say that it's probable that the Seattle Mariners will not get to the World Series this year. But I said a couple of years ago, it'd be fascinating to see at some time a Nationals-Mariners World Series, especially if both teams were getting there for the first time. That would get me going. Last thing I want to get into today, we're going to go into the topic of the day, which I'll play the music bed and we'll get right into it. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com.
One goddamn hit.
You can't say goddamn on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
People spreading the dirt and goes. Try to give you warning, but everyone ignores me. Told you everything loud and clear, but nobody's listening. Called to you so clearly, but you don't want to.
The Nobody's Listening segment is brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. And obviously this is the part of the program where we get towards the last 30 plus minutes of the show. And anybody that's tuned in at the beginning is probably tuned out. And I do appreciate everybody that's stuck around to be part of the show this long. And, I say this, and I'm going to preface this because this is the Nobody's Listening part of the show. This is the part where I get away from sports and I start to talk about real issues that go on in this world. And if you saw the headline, you'd say, hey, it could be pretty controversial. And I'm going to bring up the topic of deadbeat dads. And the first thing that I want to say about that is there is a chance right now for everybody that has abandoned their kids. And in most cases it's dads, but in some cases it is mothers. And hopefully you understand, as being the one that's done this, that has left, that has abandoned their child or children, that it's not the child's fault, anything that's happened. And I understand we live in a world now where there's tumultuous relationships. There's a lot of, probably way more premarital sex than ever was in any other generation before this. There's mistakes that happen. Easiest thing to do, as long as, sexually you're able to do it, is to have a child. And so many children are born into broken homes. And because of that, they don't get the experience of the upbringing of both a mother and father. And in the cases that they do, they're in torn households where they have the mother trying to leverage the father and vice versa. And in some cases, their relationship gets so tough that they can't be around each other, and it gets taken out on the kids. Message I have to anybody that is considered in this spot a deadbeat dad or a deadbeat mom, whether it's your fault or not, regardless of how bad your situation is, regardless of how much you hate the person that you happen to make a child with, it's not fair to the child to not have you in their life. And the best thing that I could suggest is it's never too late to get yourself back in your child's life. Now, obviously, when the child hits the age of 18, they will have more of the power to say, no, you know what, you haven't been in my life this long. But it shouldn't deter you as a parent or as a so-called parent because you've abandoned your child. Now think about the amount of people that abandon their children and never come back. If you decide at some point in your life that you want to make right and attempt to be involved in your child's life, it's better than what some people have done. And I just think there's no excuse in the world that we live in right now. You can make any excuse that you want, but I don't think any of them holds any water. If you've made a child, if you've created a child, it's not fair to that child that you're not in their life. And if you don't, at the very least, make an effort at some point of that child's life, you may not even understand how bad you're impacting them as adults. And you feel bad for children that grow up without a parent by choice. There's enough kids that grow up because of a tragedy or an illness, may not have the opportunity to have one of their parents in their life. They may have passed away. But for the parents that are making the decision that they don't want to be involved in a little child's life, it's disgusting. And the only thing that I could say, and I hope I get through to one person today, I hope there's one person that has abandoned their children or their child that will think at this point and at least hear me out. It's never too late. It's never too late to get back into that child's life. It's never too late to at least make an effort. It may not be the same as it is for those parents that never abandon their children, but to make an effort, to try, to just put your arm out there and say, you know what, you're my child, I created you, I'm sorry for what's happened, but I want to make the most out of the rest of the life that we have together. You could make a difference. And don't do it for you. Do it for that freaking child. A little bit of a recap of the show today, NBA draft. almost passed away there. Were all the trades in the draft necessary? Especially when you're dealing with second-round picks who don't turn out to be anything. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, they're talking now. The other quarterbacks in the National Football League history, nobody wants anybody, to be there when you look over your shoulder. Mariners, Nats, two teams looking to get to the playoffs this year. In fact, both on pretty good tracks to do that. In fact, you'd make the case that the Seattle Mariners have a better chance of getting to the playoffs than the Washington Nationals if the season were to end today or within the near future. Deadbeat dads, you just heard the monologue. Be back with you next week, probably next Monday. This is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, be doing a reboot of the Carlucci Show with Greg Carlucci down at his studios over in Long Branch. So see how that goes. Long-time show that's been very successful. Carlucci has brought in a lot of different guests in the entertainment world. And we'll be, shooting a you-know-what, talking about anything that's on our mind. So that'll be tomorrow. We'll be back with you this coming Monday. Thank everybody for tuning in. I hope everybody has a really nice weekend and enjoy that first weekend of summer and that last weekend before you get into 4th of July. And all of a sudden you see the summer kind of flying by like it always does. So God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.